Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Rhonda Rosen, and I'm the Programming and Exhibitions Librarian here at Hannon Library. On behalf of our entire outreach team, welcome to Virtual Faculty Pub Night. I would like to remind you all that Faculty Pub Night is the library's opportunity to spotlight our faculty's accomplishment to our students, staff, faculty, and during COVID to anyone who has Zoom. So please tell your friends and join us for more of our Faculty Pub Nights. Before I introduce our speakers, let's go over some ground rules for tonight. Number one, we will be recording this evening's presentation and it will be available shortly on the library's YouTube channel. After the presentation, we will open it up to questions from the audience. If you have questions for our speakers during the presentation, you are welcome to submit your questions or question by using the Q&A function on the bottom of your screen. All questions will be compiled by our outreach team and submitted to our speakers as time permits. So tonight's Faculty Pub Night is power-packed with LMU faculty from the College of Business Administration. Our presenters will be discussing their article, Dine-in or Take Out, Modeling Millennials Cooking Motivation and Choice. This article was published in the Journal of Retailing and Consumer Services. So, to get on with the show, our speakers, I'm going to introduce our speakers in alphabetical order, and they are Dr. Aidin Namin, who is an assistant professor of marketing. He earned his PhD in marketing analytics from the University of Texas at Dallas. A modeler by training and passion, Dr. Namin's main area of research is analytics and big data. He has received multiple grants and teaching, research, and best paper awards from different institutions. He has recently been awarded a competitive national external research grant, the AFM grant from the Academy of Marketing Science. Currently, he serves on the editorial board of Journal and Business Research and Journal of Marketing Analytics. Our second presenter is Dr. Mila Bowie, an associate professor of marketing. She earned her PhD from the University of Arkansas and her MBA from Loyola University, New Orleans. She has professional experience in promotional marketing and business development and market research. She has published research articles at many premier business journals, including the Journal of Marketing, Psychology and Marketing, Journal of Public Policy and Marketing, and the Journal of Business Research, among others. Her research interests include health public policy, consumer judgment and decision-making, and emerging technology. Our third presenter is Dr. Mitchell Hamilton, an associate professor of marketing. He is an award-winning scholar and brand activism thought leader that earned a BS in marketing from San Diego State University, an MBA from Clark Atlanta University, and a PhD in consumer behavior from Syracuse University. As a doctoral student, he studied quantitative modeling by the marketing department and experimental design by the social psychology department, where he became wildly fascinated by human behavior and more specifically, consumer behavior. And last but not least, Dr. Julian Clair is an associate professor of marketing and academic program director of the MBA at Loyola Marymount University. He earned a BA in business administration with a concentration in marketing from Clark Atlanta University, an MS in business administration from the University of Washington, and a PhD in marketing with a concentration in consumer psychology from the University of Washington. His interdisciplinary interest has led to publications in marketing science, Journal of Consumer Research, Journal of Marketing Education, and the Association for Consumer Research Film Festival. Professor St. Clair has been recognized for academic excellence by the PhD Project, the AMA Foundation, and the National Black MBA Association. So Professor St. Clair and his co-authors received Best Working Paper in 2020 by the Association for Consumer Research for their study of diversity marketing. If you would like more fuller information on our scholars, we have placed a link in chat that will, there it is, that will give you more information. So Dr. Namin will begin tonight's presentation and will be joined by his colleagues in our Q&A portion afterwards. Take it away, Dr. Namin.
Thank you very much, Rhonda. I would like to, first of all, thank all the attendees and all the participants who took the time to come to this presentation. We realize that it's getting later in the day. Also, we would like to thank the library for inviting us to present our research in this exciting moment. And also a special thanks goes to Rhonda, Carol, John, and the entire team at the Hannah Library who have been so supportive and very easy to work with in the past few months. So we are excited about this. The paper that we will be presenting tonight, as Rhonda mentioned, the title is Dine-in or Takeout, Modeling Millennials Cooking Motivation and Choice. As you can see, in addition to the three awesome colleagues that I have at LMU, the second co-author of this paper is Dr. Brian Ratchford, who is at the University of Texas at Dallas. I just would like to acknowledge Brian's contribution to this project, and Brian is amongst the audience right now. We thank you, Brian, for taking the time and joining this event. Basically, this is a product of 4 people at LMU and 1 person at University of Texas at Dallas. A little bit of background about this project, which we feel that is interesting to share, is that originally this paper was titled as Freshman 15. And we started the project with that title. A lot of the research front end was developed focusing on the Freshman 15 concept. My apologies. And so we basically positioned the paper using the Freshman 15 term a lot. We sent it out to a journal that was considered as an A journal based on the ranking that the CBA uses. And an interesting story is, I'm sorry, my voice has been deteriorating recently. So in that journal, the structure is that you could actually see whether the paper has been assigned to a handling editor within or outside the US. And we have been, it came to our attention that the paper has been assigned to somebody in Europe. So long story short, seems like handling editor who was not in the US, and seems like some of the reviewers, we suspected that they were not also within US schools. They may not have been very familiar with the term Freshman 15. So the paper did not make it to that journal because based on several of the comments, it seems like they did not connect to the extent that they would like the paper. So that was an interesting lesson learned. So when we had the paper back, we changed the paper title and significantly repositioned the front end, trying to make sure that we stay away from the Freshman 15 term. And we send it to an equally good journal, another A journal, which is the journal that the paper is published in that right now, Journal of Retailing and Consumer Services, which is another A journal. So I just wanted to share this story with everybody, that was an interesting story for all of us that we observed throughout publishing this paper. Okay, so a little bit about the motivation and the research question that we have for this project. One of the things that has been going on in the past few years is that the numbers are showing that every year about 200 million people, students, are leaving their parents' houses and moving to a new life, to college life. The number is staggering, right? 200 million. So for many of these people, and many of our amazing students are right now in this room, I believe. So students might basically connect with this concept. For the first 15 years or 18 years of our lives, parents are taking care of us. They make sure that we eat healthy, we eat at the right time, we eat the right thing. Then we move to college. That supervision is not there anymore. So what happens is that many students unfortunately get involved with unhealthy eating behaviors. And now, and that is basically what we call it in the US, the freshman 15. Marketers now are looking at these new customers who just turned to be adults as a potential pool of people that they can be out there to purchase their products, right? But at the same time, the marketers are getting a little bit concerned in terms of what is happening with the health being of these people, given the fact that their routines are completely changing when they move out of their parents' house. There is a term in the literature that we have used in this analysis, and that is a term which is called activity consumption. So activity consumption is basically referring to the process by which every time every individual is doing something, the term used there is that individual is consuming an activity. For instance, you're reading a book, the activity being consumed is reading the book. You go skydiving, the activity being consumed is skydiving. You cook, the activity being consumed is that you cook. So that is the building block of our analysis. And in the next slide, I will elaborate more on the theory and details of how this is related to our work. Now, while there is some research in terms of how activity is being consumed for a number of activities, such as playing video games, working out, hiking, reading, to the best of our knowledge, nobody has looked into cooking as an activity that is being consumed. And even beyond that, nobody has even looked into the fact, the process that college students, millennials specifically, this important generational cohort, go through when they leave their parents' houses and become engaged in a new life where cooking is not a major part of it necessarily, and different types of eating habits basically start forming out. So that is basically the motivation and the main research question that we are trying to see how slash if cooking and eating out behavior for millennials change when they move to college. For that, the literature shows that when we consume an activity, there are basically three main motives that are involved with it: the hedonic motive, the self-fulfillment motive, and the social motive. The hedonic motive basically is saying that we do the activities generally that gives us a sense of pleasure, okay? So for instance, playing video games. Many people play video games because they enjoy. There is a feeling of pleasure and fun. So that is one of the motives that encourages people to consume an activity, meaning conducting the activity. The second motive is the self-fulfillment motive. This is basically the motive that involves with having a feeling of confidence or feeling of self-esteem when one conducts an activity. Okay, for instance, for many of our great students who might be in this meeting right now, they are going to college because again, the activity being consumed here is now going to college, because it gives them a feeling of self-esteem and self-fulfillment when they graduate, that now they have a degree and they have some profession. Thirdly, the third motive is the social motive. Social motive is basically based on the fact that human beings are individuals that by nature enjoy interacting with other humans, right? So in this case, many people can consume an activity because they seek a feeling of social belonging from that. For instance, while many people, all of us know how to read a book and we can read books by ourselves, we have the concept of book clubs. So many people go to book clubs to consume the same activity, which is reading a book, but now they seek the social motive because they want to interact with others and be able to discuss the content of the book. On top of this, another important factor in activity consumption is the skill, right? People are more likely to consume an activity when they have the skill for that. Think about driving. People who are more skilled in driving are more likely to drive. And finally, there is the fifth factor, which is the cost associated with consuming an activity. Let me give you an example. Traveling is fun. Many people enjoy traveling. So this is again consuming an activity, but traveling is costly. So in order for us to be able to travel, we always look into the budget and we try to see if that travel plan is in line with our goals and with our budget. So these 5 elements are basically the building blocks of activity consumption, here the activity being cooking. Our study is a mixed method study. So we utilize 2 different approaches. So we do have a qualitative analysis, which we use focus groups, and we do have a quantitative analysis, which we use survey data, and we use econometrics and analytics to model the choice of millennials and students. In the next slide, I will elaborate more on these 2 methods. Here, I just want to point out that the approach of our study has been both qualitative and quantitative. For our qualitative study, we ran several focus groups. We had 10 focus groups. Each focus group covered 8 to 10 undergraduate students. So basically, we asked these students in terms of, okay, so think about cooking now that you're in college. What makes you cook? What makes you go and eat out? What are the factors that play a role in the decision that you're making? The focus groups have been extremely important in the process of this research because they helped us identify the main factors that are going on among college students when it comes to making a choice between cooking versus eating out. And they also helped us identify the variables that we should be using as control variables in our choice modeling and quantitative study. The focus groups also provided us having a better understanding of how the millennial generation understands this process and has been very helpful later to justify the findings of our quantitative study. Having the results of our focus group, then we developed a comprehensive questionnaire. In that questionnaire, we asked several questions from the students, and those questions were guided, like I said, by the focus groups. We made sure that the questions are also in line with the literature, where we asked about different motives that are guiding the activity consumption process. The questionnaires were distributed in 2 schools in large cities, large metropolitan areas in Texas and California. So in that sense, our pool of respondents is students who are going to schools in urban areas in the country. And we selected Texas and California as 2 of the most populous states in the country. We collected 303 responses. About 55 of them were either incomplete or not usable for the quantitative study. So we ended up with 248 valid responses, which is enough to have the study within the 95 confidence level to make sure that our results are statistically and econometrically sound and valid. Now that we had the data ready, it was time to form our hypothesis and use a little bit of analytics, magic, and hocus pocus for choice modeling to really dig into the data and do some data modeling to see what the data tell us. We formed 6 hypotheses. The first 3 were based on the 3 motives that the literature has identified as the motives that are guiding activity consumption. So we were specifically interested to see whether self-fulfillment, hedonic, and social motivation play a role in cooking as an activity consumption process for college students. Additionally, we looked into the role of skills and time of cooking. So we hypothesized that it is expected that if somebody knows how to cook or is more familiar with cooking, they would be more likely to cook. We also looked into the effect of time for cooking. And that was something that several students were concerned about it through the focus groups that, hey, yeah, I want to cook. And some of them actually said, I know how to cook, but I don't have time for it. College is so busy, or I have other things to do, or to enjoy my college life. We specifically looked into the moderating effect of skills on time to see whether the negative impact of time starts diminishing if somebody knows how to cook. So that was also a byproduct of what we were trying to test. We used our choice model and we got some interesting stuff. I realize this slide may look a little bit too wordy, but I'm going to explain that. And obviously after this, we are going to have a Q&A as an open panel. We are happy to discuss this further. Once again, I apologize about my voice. So our major finding was that self-fulfillment is a major motive in encouraging college students to cook. Okay, what we found was that among the three motives, this one plays the most important role when it comes to making the choice of cooking over eating out. What we suggest is that maybe there needs to be some thoughts in terms of trying to embrace the self-satisfaction that comes with cooking. So college students would think of cooking as something that gives them a feeling of self-satisfaction, and then they would be more likely to choose cooking over eating out. We believe that the most interesting finding of our study that the reviewers and the editor also were excited about that was that we found a negative impact of hedonic on cooking, which is in the opposite direction of what other studies of activity consumption for other activities have been found. In other words, we found that the more the feeling of pleasure that the college student gets from cooking, the less likely they are to cook. There are a couple of explanations about that came from our focus groups. Many students mentioned cooking as both a time and labor-intensive activity. And many of them mentioned that I'm in college, I have other things to do, I have to study, I have to hang out, I need to hang out with my friends, I have things to do. And that is why I prefer not to spend that much time for cooking while I do enjoy cooking. Several of our students mentioned that they see cooking as an activity for a special occasion. So they mentioned that, yeah, I do enjoy cooking, but I feel that it's for a special occasion. So that's why I'm at college, I tend to cook less. And several of them mentioned that, yes, I enjoy doing it, but I'm at college. I do not have access to a whole lot of equipment. So that's why I cook less. So this is an interesting finding that differentiates our study from previous studies of activity consumption, which none of them have looked into cooking, they have looked into others. So for cooking, we found the opposite effect. For the social motivation, we found some mixed results. And we went back and digged more into the data to see what is exactly going on. We realized that maybe the wording of this question that we had in our questionnaire might have been a little bit difficult to interpret or to be understood by the respondents, as our question has been worded towards eating out versus cooking. So while this hypothesis is indirectly supported, the wording might have not been understood the same way by everybody. And we explained that in the manuscript. We also found that the more skills a college student have for cooking, the more likely they are to cook. This is expected. But the interesting part was that we found that while many students complain that cooking is a time-intensive activity, we empirically found evidence that if they know how to cook, meaning if they have the skills, the negative impact of the time-intensive component starts diminishing. So what it means is that if we try to educate our students, help them learn some, maybe not some simple recipes, they would overcome the negative perception of cooking being a time-consuming activity. We just want to raise another item here, is that there might be some concerns with this because several of our students are on meal plans, or if not, they still use the dining places on campuses across the country. This might impact the demand for dining places on different campuses across the country. So this is something that we brought up in the paper, that this might be a solution, but there are some unknown facts in terms of how it would impact other factors given the large number of dining places at every campus in the United States. We also did some, we also developed two examples as what we call them possible students groups that might have some information or skills or perception towards cooking, and we offered a practical intervention. So these are hypothetical cases. And also the first hypothetical case is a group of students who might enjoy cooking, and they might think that cooking is pretty self-fulfilling. So that's good. And they feel that they have the skills for it, but they're worried about the time. Okay, so they think that cooking is time intensive. That's why they kind of choose to stay away from cooking. Our practical intervention is that maybe university campuses can offer some, cooking equipments, not super fancy stuff, something like pans, utensils, pots, and also some kitchen that offers some decent foundation for cooking. And that way, this group of students would overcome their concern about cooking being time intensive, and then they would be more likely to cook. The second hypothetical group of students is a group of students who does not necessarily enjoy cooking, and they think that, okay, it's not a self-fulfilling task, and they do not see themselves to be very skillful when it comes to cooking. But on the other hand, they have this perception of cooking as not much of a time-consuming activity. The practical intervention here could be that, all right, that's fine. So for these people, try to offer some courses. So schools could offer, some 1 or 2 unit courses in cooking, something really simple. It could be part of the curriculum. It could be extracurricular. It could be an elective, that students learn some basic skills that would help them develop some knowledge about cooking. And then these people are then going to feel better for cooking. It's going to give them a feeling of self-fulfillment, and hence they're going to be more likely to cook. Our research comes with a number of limitations and future research directions. One of the major future research directions for this study is that while it has been documented that eating out is generally considered less healthy than cooking, and many people acknowledge that, this control variable in our analysis did not show that college students are actually that concerned about it. So they do know about it, but it's not a factor that impacts their decision and their choice between for cooking versus eating out. So we offered some suggestions, maybe something like recipe box and meal kits could be offered to these people, to these students, and also trying to, provide some pre-college and during college training and education to improve this from the perspective of the students. Another thing that we feel that it's worth looking into that in the future is that, as I mentioned, our study works with data from two very large cities in the US. Do millennials who go to school in rural areas in the country act the same, feel the same, have the same perceptions? Finding an answer to this question would be pretty interesting, as US has a number of very large schools that are located in college towns. So it would be interesting to see whether the result of our study applies to those populations or not. A concern that we had in our research was that we asked the students to try to recall whether they cooked or ate out in the past 14 days. To that end, there has been some concerns that I do not exactly remember what I did on every single day in the past 14 days, which is a valid concern to be raised. So a great extension to this could be to use a panel of respondents, meaning studying a group of individuals over a period of time, rather than asking them to go back and try to recall about what they have done in the past 14 days when it comes to cooking versus eating out. The next thing that can be used as an area of further research is somehow associated with the story that I shared at the beginning of our talk, that the freshman 15 term was not very familiar apparently to people beyond United States. Do millennials in other countries do cooking the same way as students who go to school in American schools do? So this is, we feel, worth investigating, seeing that if, let's say, somebody goes to school in Brazil or in France or in China or in India, how do they make the choice based on this process? Finally, our paper got published in March 2020. So that is the same month that the pandemic has happened. Basically, our data collection happened completely before the COVID-19 pandemic. So the COVID-19 pandemic has changed the life pattern and the routines of pretty much all of us. It would be nice to replicate our results to see how/if the COVID-19 pandemic might have impacted the choice between cooking versus eating out for college students. So that's another area that we suggest to be looked into and see how the pandemic has made a change. Once again, thank you for your attention. Hopefully this is thanking everybody in several possible languages. We appreciate your attention. We appreciate the faculty, staff, deans, and our amazing students who joined this meeting. And it has been a pleasure working on this, and we look forward to discussing this more in the Q&A session.
So that's what that article was about. Now I understand it so much better. No, just kidding. It was a great article, and thank you, Dr. Namin, for sharing that fascinating research. You guys did such a great job with this. I'm going to have Dr. Mila Bowie, Dr. Mitch Hamilton, and Dr. Julian St. Clair join us now for the Q&A portion of the evening. Here we go. Everybody's here. Excellent. So before we get to the audience's chat, I always like to ask a couple of questions that our outreach team put together after reading your article. And my favorite question, and probably it was my question, was, your research seems to be based on lunch and dinner. What about breakfast, the most important meal of my day? Anybody? Am I wrong? Did you include breakfast in your results?
I can take that one. Julian, you can, please go ahead.
No, I was just gonna fill the air, but I would much rather hear what you have to say.
Okay, sure. So your understanding is correct. Our study was focused on lunch and dinner. We did not ask about the number of times the students whether ate out or cooked for breakfast. And one reason for that was actually guided by our focus groups. So many students mentioned that when it comes to making a cooking decision, they see cooking as something that happens for an actual meal. And in their mind, based on what they shared, they see lunch and dinner as actual meal. And several of them mentioned that many of them have early in the morning classes, like eight in the morning classes. And they said that they might consider cooking for breakfast, but there is, given the tight schedule, the option might not be there. So based on that feedback that we got through the qualitative study, we focused more on lunch and dinner. In addition to that, we added the question separately in our questionnaire, asking about the number of times that they actually cooked specifically for breakfast. The number was very small and negligible, and we made sure that excluding that does not negatively impact our empirical analysis.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, I have one other question, and that towards the end of your presentation, you were talking about if students could be educated more and maybe given help with cooking. So you mentioned the meal box idea, and so I was wondering if do you think that like maybe Sodexo, for instance, could offer meal boxes where the students would have basically, all the ingredients there, or and instructions? Do you think that that would be like a popular idea, or do you think that would be more helpful? Anyone want to tackle that one? Would that incentivize the cooking a bit?
I can take that one.
Okay.
That's a great question. I think that that would be a fantastic alternative in terms of educating our students and also allowing for more options. I think that whenever it is that we provide an array of alternatives for students to grow, whether that be in learning how to cook or learning about healthier consumption behaviors, that is always going to be something that would incentivize students and or encourage students to make better health decisions. But I think that, quite a bit of this research in this area also suggests to us that it has much to do with education. So, if we take a step back, even in the literature, it tells us that quite a bit of that education when it comes to our health comes from the home, right? What is it that they are learning from mom and dad, right? Are they learning how to cook before they go off to college? Even within our school systems, what are some of the resources that are made available in high school so that they get this training? I think those are some of the functional areas that we may need to consider. It starts in the home. It starts at high school, right? It starts in different activities that engage in before they come to college. And quite a bit of the research actually shows us that much of how it is that students consume and behave in terms of their health has much to do with what was the upbringing, right? What were they exposed to? So I think much more of the weight should be veered towards that direction, education. But I also think, to your suggestion, Rhonda, that, the recipe boxes, I think are just a fantastic and much more modern alternative that would be interesting to our students. So absolutely, why not, right?
Yeah. It would help me. I know that.
Can I add a little
Okay.
bit? Can I add a
Yes,
little bit to
please,
that as well?
please do.
And so thank you for that, Mila. That was super insightful. I also would like to say that, one of our more interesting findings was the idea that the more a student actually enjoys cooking, the less they're actually going to cook. It's very counterintuitive. And a lot of that has to do with time, which we might not be able to, to ease for the students. And those boxes may address that in some way. But a lot of that comes from them not having the right equipment and access to stoves and ovens that would allow them to actually cook the way they want to cook. And so that's just another consideration. If we're thinking about how do we address this problem, I mean, we have to make those tools accessible, to
Right.
students who actually want to cook.
Right. So one of the questions that came from Dean Christine Brancolini is, did all of the students in your study live in a residence hall? And I think, Aidin, you want to answer that one?
Absolutely, I would be happy to. That's a great question. So our students from both schools, we have a mix of students who live on campus, off campus, or those who are on meal plans. So across our entire sample size, about 3/4 of our students live on campus, and 1/4 indicated that they live off campus. So that's a great question. As we were analyzing the data, we wanted to make sure that this is not biasing our findings, given that 3/4 is a major number. But they conducted other econometric tests, and we made sure that it is not causing any statistically impact on our findings.
Mhm.
Thank you very much.
And-
Yes, go ahead, Mila.
That is a great point in terms of the population that was sampled, but I do want to bring this to light as well. So what it is that you see in our study, as well as what it is that you have seen in previous studies, is that when we take a look at that hedonic motivation, it has so much, we see that that negative effect here in our research, but if you take a look back at the literature, what we're seeing consistently, that it has a lot to do with the frequency of cooking. So there is a direct correlation that shows us the more that they are having to cook, the less likely they're actually enjoying it. So it has much to do with the fact that it becomes more of work, right, rather than pleasure. And we're talking about a population where some of their priorities are, let me put this in a much better light. Some of the things that they value is there's that social interaction, right, with friends, right? So much of that has to do with what it is that drives their behavior. So the more that they're having to cook, the more you're also taking away that social interaction time with friends. So that is one of the reasons why we're seeing that in our study, which again is also consistent with previous literature.
Right, right. Okay, yes, Julian.
Yeah, I would love to just add on to what Mila was just, Dr. Bowie was just speaking on. There was another question in the chat about a cooking club. I love the idea of a cooking club. Great idea. And that harkens back to both the point that Dr. Bowie just brought up and what was mentioned earlier, which is people do have this need for belongingness, right? This social motivation. And I think we can gain a lot of efficiencies by seeing how many of those needs we can fulfill at one time. I mean, maybe we give the cooking boxes to the cooking club and with the equipment, and like now we've removed all the barriers. And I think that's one of the biggest takeaways, at least for me, was how interesting it was to see all the barriers and to think about what a comprehensive intervention starts to look like.
Perfect, perfect. So Jamie Hazlett from the library says, I love this project. Has your team shared these findings with LMU Student Affairs? And if so, how was the reception and the discussion? Anyone? Anybody want to talk? Yes, Aidin, go ahead.
It's a great suggestion. We have not shared it yet, but it's a great thought actually to do that. We thank you for bringing that to our attention, Jamie, and I think we should do it.
You never know. Amy Chow wrote and said, how did you define millennial for your research? And how would you differentiate from Gen Z? That was a question that when we were coming up with our questions in the outreach department, we were trying to figure that out too. So
Yeah,
thanks,
can I take a first stab at it? And then I'd have to go back and maybe Aidin knows exactly where we cut off, the millennial like age limit or date of birth. But I find that to be an interesting question, because I think that question is motivated by the fact that we're in the process of transitioning away from millennial college students, right? So most of our college students that were millennials are graduating off, if they haven't already graduated off, and we have this new wave of post-millennial Gen Z consumers that are hitting these campuses. And so I think it's an interesting question. Our data was very specific to millennials because when we were collecting data, 90-some% of college students were millennials. And yeah, there is something to say about the differences between generational cohorts and behaviors, like how often they're going to cook versus eating out. And so, that's an interesting, kind of like a future research question that we might look into.
There you go. Excellent. Okay, Aaron Kaplan says, I noticed that in your results, married students are more likely to eat at home. I wonder what role you think household size plays in the discussion of whether to cook.
I'd love a quick opener at that one, and I would also love to hear what my colleagues think about it. And also going off of the last question from Amy about age, it's interesting to think about the different segments, different groups of potential audiences, and the different intersectional ways to describe them, including not only age, but also like gender or family life cycle. The married folks data was really interesting, and I remember a conversation with Dr. Namin about should we separate this data and look at it, like focus on the non-married folks, because how many college students are really married? And so we decided to keep it in, and it was like a kind of an Easter egg, interesting thing to notice. So kudos to you for noticing that. And I do think it plays a role. I could speculate, but I would love to hear more. I think Dr. Bowie for sure would probably know more about me. So I would love to hear from her. Thanks.
Thanks, Julian. My perspective on that, based on experience as well as what I've seen in the research, is that particularly in this situation, yes, we're dealing with the college population, which, majority of them are not married. However, when we take a look at the literature as a whole outside of the student population, in households where there's a marriage, essentially there are going to be roles that are going to be fulfilled, right? And usually in a married household, they're more likely than not at least two, if not three or four, when we're talking about children that are involved. And so therefore, what we see is there's a shift when we take a look at the role of cooking, or at least in the context of our research, cooking as an activity consumption. So for some household, it just becomes one that is a necessity when you're talking about economic, financial, where it is that, the most value can be created with the least amount of cost in order to satisfy, and feed the household in that situation. But then at the same time, we also see a culture where, if you look, across the media, we are now seeing cooking shows and chefs become celebrity chefs because of pretty much the gravitation among the population towards food and the food culture. And as such, we see that shift coming, going from, that utilitarian type of need that's being fulfilled in the household to one that is more hedonic consumption. So when we take a look at the variables we look at in our study, hedonic motivation, it is, I would have to say, completely different when you take a look at that marriage population, that demographic. It's completely different, right? The way that would be, I wouldn't say the way that it would be defined, but I think that it would be one where there would be more boundaries put in place to better define hedonic motivation and that activity consumption among groups that are married. So completely, we're talking about, apples and oranges here in this case. So I think that's one of the reasons why we're also seeing that negative correlation between hedonic motivation and actual cooking activity consumption.
Right, and just to add to that, as to add to Dr. Bowie's comment about it's apples and oranges, right? It's kind of just two completely different things. I mean, I was once a married college student, and so you get a lot of those moderating variables, like, of course, money and a lot of other things. But there was also like the culture of marriage, or, you know, our idea of what marriage is. And maybe that involves a lot more cooking at home. But it was also what was very different from maybe our non-married or single student population, where they saw cooking as something they would do for special occasions. So that was one of our findings. We thought going out to eat, we would save for special occasions. It was like, we're eating at home every day, every meal. And if there's something really special going on, then maybe we'll go out to a restaurant. And so it was just a completely different.
Yeah, exactly. Dean Smith says, I may have missed this in the presentation. I had to step away, but curious as to how income may have impacted your results. And Aidin, I think you want to respond to that?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Yeah, that's a great question. For income, what we did in our data collection and modeling process was that we looked into the impact of the amount of money that a student is making from two angles. One of the angle was that we asked about the maximum price that a student would be willing to pay for eating out for an item. So that was an indirect measure of their willingness to pay, which has some correlation with their income. We also directly asked them about the value of 1 hour of their work. And the reason that we worded this the way that we did was when we were doing the focus groups, we realized that when students are being asked about income, they are unsure whether they are being asked about the amount of money that they are making, or whether they should be including their parents' income in it as well. So we thought asking them directly about how much is 1 hour of your time worth it, without asking them to speculate in terms of how much money they will be making, or sometimes the students receive, you know, monthly, bi-weekly, weekly payments from the parents into their bank accounts. That would somehow alleviate and help us look into the matter in more details.
Yeah. Aaron Kaplan says, I noticed that in your results, married students are more likely to eat at home. Oops, did I do that one already? No.
Sorry,
Yes,
yeah, I kind of jumped ahead on.
Okay, yeah, it does that on me, and it makes me crazy. I have a question for you. So in your future research, are you thinking about also maybe doing or including in your research graduate students versus undergraduate? Is there any difference, do you think, there? Or do you that might get more married students in that loop? I don't know, just a possibility.
I can take that. Absolutely. I think that's a great idea. For us, that's very easy to collect simply because we're on a college campus. But I think that for the future, we always want to make sure that our results are robust, and they are results that can generalize to the population as a whole. So if anything, we more likely than not are going to be collecting consumer panels that allow us to get a much more generalized sample in order to test and then determine whether or not you know, our current results sustain. That can be confirmed for future research. So I think that is something that we more likely than not will be doing.
And both Dean Brancolini and I think, are a little film oriented. She asked, I hope you'll follow up with the millennials who are out of college or university and now in the workforce. And I was thinking it's kind of like a, you know, the 7-Up series, you know, every 7 years, could you check in with them and see what, if they've changed any with age? And that would be an interesting thing. Yeah, it'd be very cool. Okay. Let's see.
I believe, did we I think the existing literature, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Bowie and Dr. Namin would probably know better than me. So matter of fact, I'm gonna be quiet. I'll let them know. I'm just joking. They doesn't the literature suggest that this is a phenomenon that happens in college, and then when they leave college, they kind of go back to that more healthier approach to eating that they engaged in, you know, in their parents' home. Doesn't the literature speak to that a little bit?
You know, you're absolutely right, Dr. Hamilton, you're absolutely right there. The literature does indicate that, you know, as when you take a look at this, actually goes back to Rhonda's point as well, with the last question, is that when you take a look at longitudinal studies, we do actually see this effect, right? It's that it is a certain culture that they call it, the freshman 15 and whatnot. It is during the college years, but after the college years, they learn from that experience, that negative experience that impacts them, right, in such a way that they then start to take a look at different ways in which they can be healthier. So not only is, that intrinsic motivation there, but then you also have that lifestyle change, right? That life cycle and that lifestyle eventually that changes in such a way where, number one, they have a little bit more time, they have a little bit more resource, they have a little bit more money, right? More likely than not, they are then going to be in relationships that require, different lifestyles, that then allows them, or rather, it actually facilitates them to engage in these types of activity consumptions that are healthier for them in general. So it's, yeah, I mean, it's pretty consistent with the previous literature if you take a at the longitudinal types of research that currently exists in health and marketing.
I would like to ask a question of all of you, and that is, when you were growing up, did you learn to cook from your parents?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, a little bit for Julian.
A little bit. My mom really, we were always, okay, not always. We were sometimes welcome to help her. My mom really did a lot of the cooking, and my dad would do infrequent cooking.
A lot of the
However,
consuming.
yeah, yeah, and you always knew when it was dad's turn to cook because it was like cornbread, chili, and that's about it. But it was some good cornbread. But when I wanted to answer your question, where I really started to actually start learning more cooking was exactly this study, which was when I left home to go to college, and I was calling my mom like, "Mom, what's the recipe? How do I make X, Y, and Z?" And she would walk me through it. And still to this day, we chat about it, and I'm still learning. So at least a sample size of one. I learned. I started the process of really learning more as I transitioned into college, and then maintained that learning process since then.
And
Yeah,
I did,
and I wanted to add to that because that's an interesting question because I think there's cultural Well, first of all, my father was similar to Julian's father. I don't think I ever remember my father cooking anything. I'm trying to think. I don't think he's ever made a meal. But my mother, who was Filipino, that's a cultural thing that, we all join in on the cooking. I remember her making lumpia and we're all rolling the lumpias, but it was like a fun family thing that we would always do. And so I see some cultural implications there.
Yeah, I was thinking some of it must have to do with nature versus nurture, because I know in my generation, mother cooked, father, ate, and the kids got lost. I don't remember ever really working with my mom in the kitchen until maybe when I got near college age. But I know that there are a lot of cultures where you're right, Mitch. It's a social thing. It's a cultural thing that we all cook together.
And one other quick point, and Dr. Bowie mentioned earlier about celebrity chefs and whatnot. That's also a cultural shift that I feel like we'll probably see with the new generations of college students, where cooking is cool now. Like that didn't used to be a thing. There's cooking shows, there's famous chefs and whatnot. It's become a thing where it's not this laborsome thing. It's like, no, younger people are competing with each other, who can cook the best. It's become, they gamify it, and so I think we're going to see a lot of that in
The
these
Great
in these
Baking
younger
Show,
generations.
the Great British Baking Show, all of those, yeah.
Great point.
Well, this has been really fun, you guys. Thank you so much for bringing this to Faculty Pub Night. We've really enjoyed this a lot. I'm sure that your future research, when you are bringing in the COVID year and a half, that will also be a really interesting bit of research too. So I want to thank all of you, and Dr. Aidin, your voice, I get hurt. I hope everything clears up for you and you get some good rest. And thank you for doing that. I really appreciate it. So Dr. Mila Bowie, Dr. Mitch Hamilton, Dr. Julian St. Clair, Dr. Aidin Namin, thank you so much for this. And I really appreciate all the great questions from the audience. You guys did a great job. And so one last thing I would like to say that we would all like to thank you all, but we would also like to thank our Dean, Christine Francolini, who is always supporting the library's great programming. And we really appreciate that support. I hope you will join us next month on Tuesday, February 16th at 5 p.m. when we will feature Dr. Kate Pickert, who will be discussing her book, Radical: The Science, Culture, and History of Breast Cancer in America. And last but not least, please take time to fill out the very, very short survey that will pop up once you leave the program, as it will help us plan and improve our future programming. So once again, thank our presenters for this wonderful, wonderful, and I'm going to go eat now. So thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.